Here's some interesting news coming out of Science magazine in one of their Science Alert articles. It's titled, "Once Lush Sahara was home to a surprisingly unique group of humans." You can see the archaeological find that they found here. It's kind of morbid, so I won't show you that picture too often. I'll try to show some others that go along with this, but this is an article, and I'm going to try to take pictures of the article and show you directly here so you can see what is being said. Currently a harsh, arid landscape, it's hard to believe that the Sahara was once studded with sparkling water bodies that nourished lush green savannas, but the remains of human pastoralists and their livestock have been found in the region's rock shelters. A new genetic analysis suggests that the humans who called this 7,000-year-old version of the Sahara home largely kept to themselves, genetically speaking. Now, some people that are listening now may not be aware, but some 7,000 years ago, or even sooner really, as it dwindled away into a desert that we know of as the Sahara today, which is about as deep as the United States is tall, and about as wide as 1.5 to 2 of the United States sideways, is definitely a separation from North Africa and the Mediterranean region from sub-Saharan Africa. I've done a lot of other videos on this because of genetic finds that were found in older days, and one of the ones I really liked that I did in that was mermaids of the Green Sahara, because in one of these rock shelters they show these people that are diving and swimming with spears, looking much like mermaids, if you will, having fishtails for feet, and they're swimming with dolphins and whales, and even a white whale, which kind of looks a little bit like a Moby Dick kind of thing. But I did this in conjunction with talking about where the mythology of mermaids comes from, because everybody believes that it has to do with the Little Mermaid, and of course it does in our modern time, very much so. But where does that come from? Well, it seems to go back even before recorded history, as shown in that video that I did there. And of course there's Dagon and my namesake Neptune, which is looked as something like that, and the connections that go along with that. But this Mermaids of the Green Sahara, and the other one I did, which I believe is Genetics of the Green Sahara, show you what they found and the people that they had found. But now that they've been able to go a little bit deeper into South Libya and very south of the Mediterranean area, into all these rock shelters that have basically been left alone for many thousands of years, they are finding archaeological finds, and this is just one of them, and I'd like to share the rest of this with you. Max Planck Institute of Evolutionary Anthropologist Nada Salim and her colleagues sequenced the ancient DNA of 2 female individuals that are buried at the Takar'ankai rock shelter in what's southern Libya. And here's a picture of it if I can get it to upload to y'all. The 7,000-year-old Takar'ankai women shared most genes with 15,000-year-old foragers from Morocco, suggesting a long-standing stable human population existed in North Africa before and during the Sahara humid period. Now, these people are all, of course, Caucasians and endemic Caucasians of North Africa. And I don't know if you're aware or not, but Africa was named after endemic Caucasians of North Africa. And prior to that, like in old Greek maps and so on, you can find that it's all called Lybia. And that was actually named after an endemic Caucasian people that lived there, known as the Berbers, which is really kind of derogatory, and actually they were named after the Amazigh tribe. And I've shown you that there are still remnants of blonde and red-haired and blue-eyed Amazigh people in this area to this day. In fact, the picture that I like to show is this girl that has won the Amazigh beauty contest 3 times, and she holds up the numbers 3 to let you know that she's won it 3 times. I don't know how many times they let her win before they go, let somebody else win. Yes, we know you're all beautiful, just let someone else win. And if you'll look through this pictures, if you Google image it or whatever, you can see a lot of these striking people that are of this area of far northwestern and central North Africa that are there that we don't consider Libyans today. But the demographics in these areas have changed quite a bit from what they were in ancient times, and that's a much more recent thing. Let's continue here with some knowledge. Evidence from ancient lake deposits, pollen samples, and archaeological artifacts confirm human presence, hunting, herding, and resource gathering in the current arid desert region, Salim and her team explain in their paper. This shared Saharan human lineage took a different path from those in sub-Saharan Africa around the same time that modern humans first left the continent more than 50,000 years ago. Now, I have another article that's coming out, and I'm trying to compile it a little better. I just need a couple of more fireworks to put in here, and then it's going to be pretty much done. But in that process, it shows you that people were leaving Africa much earlier than this 50 to 70,000 year range. In fact, there are ones that are in the Levant and other stragglers that are showing that it looks like it was going on much, much earlier. Some finds are over 160,000 BC. Let's continue with this article. The lineage then remained relatively isolated for many thousands of years, with only small traces of genes entering from the Levantine region to the northeast, including some from Neanderthals. Now, Neanderthals are not known to have had any dispersal in Africa in any way. But what they're talking about here is the people that had already previously gone out of Africa came back in, and these people were already mixed with the Neanderthal, and so that spreads back in. This really only involved the endemic North African Caucasians because sub-Saharans didn't get it. And they did a recent, fairly recent test, and they were using one certain group of sub-Saharans and saying that they have a null amount of Neanderthal, and compared it to everybody and said they really don't have any. But in reality, they found out that those people do have a small amount, or a small portion, less than 1%, but it's still there. And in fact, all sub-Saharans have an admix from people that had already gone out of Africa and coming back in, leaving them also with a less than 1% average of Neanderthal genes, whereas Caucasians and others, or anybody that ever went out of Africa, have a usually 1 to 2.5% average, up to 4%, and it's even higher in Oriental type people and so on, up to 6%. But this lineage remained relatively isolated. And they mentioned before it doesn't really have anything to do with sub-Saharans. Now, our findings suggest that while early North African populations were largely isolated, they received traces of Neanderthal DNA due to gene flow from outside of Africa, says anthropologist Johannes Cross from the Max Planck Institute in Germany. Now, I don't know if you know Johannes Cross or any of his work, but he's extremely famous. There's a few people that are really on the cutting edge of showing you man's archaic past, and he's one of them. The Takorki or Takarkori individual had less Neanderthal DNA than the Moroccan foragers did, but significantly more than those from further south in Africa. That suggests that something stemmed from a gene flow from Europe from spreading beyond the Sahara region. And I think we can probably discern what. So here you can see a graph, if I can upload the picture here, and it says all of these people that are shown here. In the top few are people and their amount of Neanderthal ancestry in early modern humans across Africa, Asia, and Europe. And so we see Europe and Asia across the top of it here, but then we see these individuals here in the middle part of it, and it definitely shows that they have this integration that goes on where they re-entered into Africa. Now you'll look at the bottom of the list here, and there are people listed as being Cameroon or even Ethiopia and so on, and at this point they don't have any Neanderthal integration, but they will eventually. Now, in some of my earlier videos that showed this, we are delving back at something that looks like 32,000 years, I believe, is the stated BC dating that goes on there. So a lot of things, it's hard to believe that were happening during this time. And there were a lot of migrations and remigrations into Africa and so on. And it left us slowly but surely with the modern humans that we have in that area today. Now, archaeological evidence suggests that the Takarkori people were early herders of livestock, which would have come from outside of Africa. Unlike the older Moroccan lineages, who were actually foragers and hunter-gatherers, if you will. That they picked up on this practice without much gene exchange is also telling. So the people that were back inside of Africa started following a different path with being cattle farmers and so on. And it's where the integration happened, roughly at 7,000 years. Now in my recent videos and a few others, I show that they have found that a suite of grains from Caucasians outside of Africa had re-entered into Africa and Egypt and ended up bringing with them this suite, as they call it, of a lot of grains and domesticated animals that were not a part of the African fauna. They were brought into Africa and not really there from the past. And that had happened in Africa, but also the article on King Tut showing that his genetic haplogroup is R1b. During that there, the bottom paragraph there describes how he came out of an area in the Caucasus region where a lot of people say the blue-eyed people originally came from and so on, and that the reason that there's a whole lot, more than 50% of R1b haplogroup across Western Europe, and even higher in Spain and France, and up to 90% in Ireland to this day, comes from a similar people. So they had spread, bringing an agricultural society into these areas at the same time, and it says it happens around 7,000 BC, so this is correlating that same thing. It's also showing that if it's already here during this time, the dating of 7,000 BC should be added up to maybe 7,500 BC, 7,400 at least, if not slightly earlier, because it's already here, it's already there, and so on. But that's how King Tut's R1b haplogroup got into Egypt, and it's well into the pre-dynastic times, and carries through in a lineage all the way that leads past King Tut and so on. And then they say that the reason that it's not so prevalent in Egypt at this point is because of migrations out of Egypt that happened after post-Roman times. So a lot of wishy-washy that happens in the Roman times there, because that's when sub-Saharan admix shows up along with Arabic admix that had never been there. So the Islamic trans-Saharan slave trade brought that in, and of course it's looked at as more a lot of the admixed Arabic people had brought that into Egypt, and now over time it's swathed over and pretty much covered most of Egypt. And that's why in that genetic article I showed you in an earlier video, they say they have very little connection to the ancient Egyptians because they didn't have this ever in the past, and it shows up. It's only 8%, but it throws it off enough to where they're saying, what? And then they look into it deeper and they go, yeah, well, it's apparently the sub-Saharan admix that shows up. So quite ironic that it's exactly the opposite of what Afrocentrics try to claim. Of course, they try to claim North Africa too, but this article is showing you that that's not the effect in any way, shape, or form. This discovery reveals how pastoralism spread across the Green Sahara, likely through cultural exchange rather than large-scale migration, Salem explains. The diverse mix of ecosystems, including wetlands and mountains, may have provided some southern barrier for migration, the researchers are suspect to. I'd like to also mention that sub-Saharans of West Sub-Sahara were really, and they're called Congoids quite often because they're in the Congo area, and while the Sahara started drying up, they were concentrated in this small area of the Congo because it was still a jungle and very lush, got enough rain and everything to it. So it's hard to believe that right next to this desert here there is this lush, much more lush, as the Sahara turns into a dried form. And so that left them there. And then of course out, whenever it became the savannas and started drying up, there are lions and all kinds of animals that are there, pretty much also making a barrier for people to come out. And then it becomes a Sahara desert and an abyss that's pretty much impassable. And it's pretty much impassable to this day unless you have some advanced form of things. It really was hard to get deep through the Sahara and make it through the other side until people found routes through by trying to make passages through and see what's down there, and having camels and so on like that. And of course you have to take a lot of water, and so it was quite a difficult adventure. But of course if people had boating, they can easily make that way around that, and that is looked at as being the earliest integration into sub-Saharans that actually ended a long time ago. And then it happened again roughly around 4,400 BC, and their preferred admix from E haplogroup, E1b, which is Eurasian in order and has been proven by geneticists and so on, and E is derived from Eurasian DE, and therefore it shows you where it came from in the first place, and this reintegration, which I think we're looking at a portion of right here. By shedding light on the Sahara's deep past, we aim to increase our knowledge of human migrations, adaptations, and cultural evolution in this key region, concludes Sapienza University archaeologist Savino Di Lerna. This research was actually published in Nature magazine, along with a lot of other things. You know, it used to be when I was a kid, you would see National Geographic going into this. But somewhere in the middle portion of my life, they got bought out by somebody else, and they quit showing sub-Saharans still in a primitive state and how they would live compared to the rest of the world, mainly due to feelings. And of course, trying to push a modern day narrative while having this go on is not working real well. So you can still see there are hunter-gatherers there, and of course there's the Khoisan and others, and any place that is really non-colonized in the day, they still have this pre-Neolithic state that's going on. all the way as a swath across into Central Africa, where the pygmies are, which are still being oppressed by Bantus after the expansion that goes on there. And you can look up pygmies and it'll tell you right there and what goes on with them. And yes, there is still a pygmy population of very small halfling sized, kind of Lord of the Rings hobbits type sized sub-Saharans that are living there too. So unlike what most people are led to believe, there's no monolith of sub-Saharans. They're all quite different from each other. And it's not just the Congoids, the ones that people would know of in America and other European countries that have gotten a lot of migrations from them and where they are today. So it's quite different. You don't see the Khoisan doing that or any of these others, and of course pygmies or anything else. But I thought it was a real enlightening small article explaining this pastoralism and giving another explanation and another evidence of how this happened. And when you look at the graph that they show in this, it kind of makes sense that these people had a reintegration back into Africa. And whenever they did, it brought pastoralism to North Africa that was already going on in the Levant and areas all the way up into Anatolia, the Caucasus Mountain region, and above and across. And the genetics that end up showing up in Africa and Egypt come from these people that were up in this area. Just like the same thing happened across northwestern Europe. And that happened through a wave of people such as the Bell Beaker culture and a few others that end up bringing pastoralism across the planet, as shortly after Stonehenge shows up and all kinds of other things. So a pretty interesting article here, and I just thought I'd go into it. It's a little smaller video, less than 25 minutes, but I think this is pretty interesting and important, showing you that they found others that are correlating this data that lead to the modern people of where we see today. And though the demographics after the trans-Saharan slave trading things have all changed from then, that's not the way that it was in ancient times. Just like when you see the population of Egypt, that really wasn't the population of ancient times. And in fact, in that other video about it that I did not too long ago, it stated clearly that this happened in post-Roman times. So during the time of the Egyptians and the pyramids, of course, and all the way through the whole thing, it doesn't appear to have changed very much, if any at all. So everybody's always said, well, they had integrations and things show up, and that's where this shows up. I had a guy in one of my videos say, well, blue-eyed people didn't show up until after the Hittites and so on. And I'm like, you're on a video telling me it didn't happen, looking at a bunch of blue-eyed statues that show you it happened well before then. In fact, it appears to have happened before 7000 BC, well into the pre-dynastic period. In fact, what we wouldn't even call Dynasty 0, it's something well below that, well prior to that, and was going on. And if you'd like more on this, look up my other video from a few years ago on mermaids of the Green Sahara, and it'll show you a little more about it. And then there's one I did of Teferalt site and a few others that are showing you this is an effect, and this is just another article showing you the same type of effect going on in ancient times and how they can make correlations and let you know how human migration started, and who went out of Africa and who came back in and things of that nature. Anyhow, if you haven't done it, like, share, and subscribe here. Make sure you've got notifications turned on for more interesting news coming up shortly. Peace.